Hello and welcome back to That Works with yet another full build of original art. Now, I've been designing and working on this specific piece at the same time as I was finishing the hero. So a lot of the themes in the piece are identical to the hero sword, but kind of inside out. My main impetus for creating this Goblet dagger was actually a podcast by Alekseyev with Jonathan Peugeot. In their podcast, they were discussing how out of place a piece of modern art was at the entrance to the Sistine Chapel. And I'm not going to judge that specific work of art, but this entire build will be a slight defense of modern art in contrast to traditional art. Keep in mind that I have an appreciation for both genres. Very often, perhaps too often, you see posts online or discussions that tell that modern art sucks. Often enough it really does, but the accusation is against modern art in general, that it sucks, that it does not deliver us a narrative. Well, that's not what modern art does. And in order to understand that, let's take a look back a little bit at the hero. In the hero, I was giving a relatively detailed introduction into traditional iconography, how it condenses the narrative and tries to tell you the whole story in one image. In contrast to that, modern art does not tell you the whole story in one image. In fact, it's designed to bypass story itself and give you a set of complex emotions all in one instance. At this point, I'm just using a shear to cut up some copper. Speaking of shear, today's sponsor is Southern New Hampshire University. See, for a while I've been telling everybody, when you can, get your schooling in first. And SNHU is one of the largest accredited universities in the nation. Here on That Works, we've always valued educational content, and we've tried to introduce more and more of it into our videos. I'm an art historian, and some people even say I look like Ryan Gosling.
Literally, no one says that.
Some people do say that. Yes, well, I'm just going to write it down as inconclusive, okay? Inconclusive. Southern New Hampshire University has been voted as one of the most innovative universities by US News and World Report. Now, it is a great opportunity to increase your level of qualification in the job you already have, or give it a better footing in looking around another job, maybe one that's more interesting, maybe the one you like more. See, I do have a bunch of degrees, and you've noticed it in the past videos where I bring up research papers, where I bring up scholars all the way from the 16th century. That comes with schooling. In the age of online internet, it's just not enough to Google something and have the AI tell you something that's 68% of times wrong. Get your schooling going, and Southern New Hampshire University is a good opportunity if you're busy, if you're afraid about tuition costs. In fact, they accept up until 90 credits from either military, vocational training, experiential training, or other schooling programs. Matt has been saying for years that one of his biggest regrets in life is that he did not go and finish his degrees, and now he can. See, I'm always looking to expand my educational background, and if you sign up, maybe one of your classmates will look like Ryan Gosling. Go to our link, check out one of the 200 degrees available, and find your path forward. So, let's begin raising. The current Goblet dagger is called the Eucharist. Obviously, I have a fascination with Catholic and Orthodox reliquary art. It is a source of tremendous power and artistic creativity. And power and creativity combined create the future of human expression. Now, because the piece is made for art knife invitational exhibition, it has to be a dagger or a bladed object, and it has to be artful. The artful part I love to do, and the knife part is fairly easy and actually contributes to the overall theme of the piece. However, in order to explain what I'm actually trying to accomplish and what ideas I'm wrestling with, we have to go back to the birth of modern art. The age of modern art starts out roughly in the year 1865 and ends approximately in the year 1945. And one of the cool artists that I was thinking about as making it, and I never used any of his visual references, was Vasily Kandinsky. And he's a key feature. He was born in the year 1866, so that is right at the beginning of modern art, and he was expressing himself through more and more complete abstraction. I personally don't really like his work, but I appreciate his contributions to the work of art. The other person I'm referring to is Clive Bell, who was born somewhat slightly later than Vasily Kandinsky, but he was part of the Bloomsbury group who were reevaluating what it means for a work of art to exist. Another person, member of the Bloomsbury group, was Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was reevaluating what philosophy and linguistics are. So keep in mind, all these great people were living at the same time and actually corresponded with each other, which is in itself fascinating. Now, when you see criticism of modern art versus traditional old school art, you usually see the Sistine Chapel versus Vasily Kandinsky, and I'm referring to a very specific post that I've seen online years ago, and saying this is spiritual art and Vasily Kandinsky's somehow isn't. But in reality, it's the reverse. And if you listen to the Alex O'Connor's podcast with Jonathan Pajot, you will see the notes, what's going on. See, when you interpret Michelangelo's art, you're not in awe with divinity. You're in awe with Michelangelo himself, with his creativity, with his vision, with his absolutely larger-than-life personality. But when you look at Vasily Kandinsky's art, you don't see much of Kandinsky. All you see is shapes, noise, and movement. The funny thing is that Vasily Kandinsky was a devout Orthodox. And he even had to leave Russia, or at the time Soviet Union, because it was repressing his beliefs, and resided later in France. The theory behind the icon was that it's a window to divinity, but it was telling a narrative. For modern artists like Vasily Kandinsky, that was still too loaded. It was not democratic enough. The reason is, in order to appreciate traditional art, you have to be well versed in what the art is trying to say. You have to read a lot of books, and you have to read other books that discuss the books you just read, and it becomes an infinite regression of knowledge. I went down that road myself, and it's quite maddening. What modern art is trying to do is trying to scrap this archaic narrative and trying to deliver the human being the experience in its immediacy. Whatever you see and feel upon looking at it, that's what you're supposed to feel. I've mentioned Clive Bell before. See, Clive Bell is key in understanding modern art because he pretty much single-handedly creates the theory of modern art through the notion of significant form. His theory is that what makes a great piece of art is not the story it tells, it's not how wealthy the people are portrayed in the portraits, it's not the quality of the materials or the size of the work. Rather, it is an ineffable emergent property of the work itself called significant form. And according to his theory, an abstract work of art can have the exact same or close to significant form to a narrative storytelling work of art because of the way he thought you interpret it. What moves you when you look at it is an abstract, almost out of this world set of forms, textures that immediately grab you before you even get to develop the language of explaining it. You see the same idea behind the works of Impressionists, and I quite frankly don't quite like Impressionists. However, I appreciate their contribution once again. Impressionists were focused on the immediacy of the experience, capturing how what you're looking at is relating to the artist. They were capturing the feeling. Not much narrative was necessary to understand what they're trying to do. Sometimes it's helpful, other times it's quite exogenous. So let's go back to Alex O'Connor and Jonathan Pajot. And I recommend you to listen to that podcast because it's absolutely wonderful. See, Jonathan Pajot is a scholar of Eastern Orthodox iconography and architecture, which is a worthwhile pursuit. However, he created, through his scholarship, somewhat of a blind spot in appreciating what modern art is trying to do. Modern art is trying to bypass traditional ways of storytelling and give an immediate experience through association of forms, colors, texture, weight, size, and context. So, for example, Duchamp's work, The Fountain, was at the same time an appreciation of form as well as a critique, a joke upon to the art establishment. If anybody remembers Duchamp, it is basically a urinal placed in the museum. Okay, so the next stage is fill it up with pitch and start chasing. Contemporary art, on the other hand, can bring about storytelling back onto the legacy of modern art. If you're looking for the most poignant image out of contemporary art that brings back storytelling onto, quite frankly, everyday form, you don't need to look any further than Perfect Lovers or Untitled by Felix Gonzalez Torres, which shows merely two clocks out of sync on the wall, clocks that you can buy at any store, but once they're placed in a certain context and the story of which is explained to you, you will be deeply moved. So, in designing the Eucharist, I had to keep all of that in mind, and I had to combine traditional metalworking techniques as they've been passed down for a long, long period of time with what we know now about human creativity, how art works, how human experiences work, appreciation of texture, appreciation of light, and narrative. I wanted to create a goblet, but the goblet that truly gives itself the name the Eucharist the more you look at it. The spike at the end is very similar to the nails of the crucifix. The goblet is obviously a reference to the filled chalice, filled with the blood of divinity. The wasp in the corner that you see is not there for any narrative purposes. It is there for the experience because it's stinging the goblet, opening up the wound in its side. And if you're familiar with Christian iconography, you know the association. And at the bottom, you do see the bread. You do see the bread in the pool of wine. Or is it wine? The idea behind the goblet dagger, the Eucharist, is to create a work of contemporary art that at the same time has close to the same amount of power the traditional reliquaries have. And studying religious artwork, and we haven't had non-religious artwork for a long, long period of time, is also studying the pain and contradictions in its expression. And what better way of expressing the pain and contradiction is through immediate imagery that is associated with itself in ways that have not been placed together before. The goblet itself is framed as an alien heart, a hive, some combination of textures that is simultaneously out of this world in the way the surface of the moon could be, and at the same time incredibly organic, incredibly familiar to us, and therefore associated with our bodily experience, the experience that we have when we're drinking the wine, the textures we feel when we hold it. It should feel like a shell of some being's body, and at the same time a monument. When you photograph it, it's designed to not reveal its true size outside of context. And it is supposed to be dangerous. The wasp stinging the heart, the hive, stinging the goblet and opening up the wound is at the same time a prediction of the spike that the goblet has at its base. It is both the wound, the weapon, and the salvation at the same time. And keep in mind, I chose to employ really traditional techniques in assembling the piece. I even made my own silver solder. However, my goal was to combine it in a context that is so familiar to us within modern art through the notion of unexpected revelation. Now that we've gone over the thought process behind the piece, let's quickly look over what I actually did to make it happen. To make the goblet part happen, I had to raise basically two cups, one substantially larger than the other one, out of copper. And the reason is, usually when you see these goblets that are especially chased, the inside needs to be smooth so that it does not attract bacteria and is easier to clean. So the larger cup I raised from a larger piece of copper and filled up with pitch and began my figurative and texture chasing. The smaller cup I raised from basically the same piece of copper, and I coated it inside with a little bit of silver and a little bit of gold just to prevent some of the oxidation. I also picked up some of the Mosaic Damascus that I had laying around. Funny enough, this shop has Mosaic Damascus laying around freely. wink, wink, and forged out a spike, kind of similar to bayonet geometry. After grinding it and getting it up to shape, what I did, I drilled a hole through the back and tapped it. See, the bayonet has to be attached to the goblet itself. So what I did is I drilled a hole through the bottom of the outer shell of the goblet and created a screw and a washer system that tightly fixes it into place without bending the piece itself. After the spike, bayonet, dagger, whatever you want to call it, were heat treated, I polished and etched them and then set it up into a fully chased cup. After everything is set up, I inserted the inner lining of the goblet, riveting into place with tiny silver pins. Now, the more impressive part of this piece is actually the wasp or the hornet. The insect form was soldered from multiple silver pieces, and the big difficulty was soldering small legs and antennae and wings to the larger part of the body. After the hornet was complete, I drilled with a tiny drill bit through the legs and riveted on to the brim of the cup. See, the goblet with a spike for a stem will not be able to stand very well until you maybe stick it into the wooden table, but your guests will not appreciate it. So it needed a stand, and a stand is a perfect framing for something like that. So I chose to work with iron and forged out the stand. The contrast of roughly forged iron with deeply chased copper is something that I found pleasing to begin with. After forging everything out, it needed a little bit of something. So I decided to use chasing and repoussé once again out of copper and make a figurative motif that shows bread in a puddle of wine. The cool part about it that I like quite a lot is that the blade, the tip of the blade just barely touches the bread, so it looks like the wine or the blood have just dripped onto the bread from the tip, from the danger zone of the entire piece. So combining the keen, sharp edge of the spike that is a nail, that is the spear, and the figure of bread, the flesh, wine, the blood, as a drinking chalice that is being stung by the hornet in its side, opening the wound, it really should immediately give the notion of the Eucharist in all its tragedy and grandeur. I am trained to do this work, but I don't do it often, even though I absolutely love it. And you know what? Sometimes I would love to take some of these commissions, do something outside of swords that has all the swordsmithing skills involved. Most contemporary art is not handmade, and yet I always insist on making everything by hand and avoid modern tools like CNC mills or lathes. The reason why is art ultimately is the communication, however subtle, between the viewer and the artist. And when you hold an object that is handmade, your hands are touching the places where the artist touched them. You feel the same textures, you see the same brush strokes. Wherever you feel something is pointy, that's what the hands of the artist do not lie, felt in the process of making it. All the smoothness and jaggedness, sharpness, softness, all of that was felt by the hands of the artist, and now you are in a communion with the creative process in the moment of appreciating the art. I guess the main idea behind the current project is my response to Jonathan Pajot. See, he draws very heavily upon the works of Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, St. Abelard, and others. And that is a perfectly beautiful approach. However, when dealing with the project of modern and contemporary art, perhaps we should look more into thinkers like William James. In 1902, he published his book, Varieties of Religious Experience, and he approaches the topic not from the standpoint of a theologian or logician, but rather as a psychologist and an anthropologist. And there he specifically focuses on the immediacy of the experience as witnessed by the person experiencing it. There are 4 features to the religious experience. The first one is ineffability, inability to be expressed in words. You can't find perfect words to explain what you're witnessing. And certainly modern art is trying to achieve that. The second one is noesis. That is, you know you're receiving some kind of knowledge, but you don't know what the knowledge is because it's ineffable. The third one is transience. The experience is bound by time. And the last one is the viewer is not in control over their emotions in the experience. They're not choosing, I'm going to see this, I'm going to feel this. No, it is an avalanche of thought, emotion, and awe that happens upon the viewer. And in that respect, modern art is trying to do that. Almost certainly, when we're looking what Kandinsky is doing, what Clive Bell is describing in his theory of art, certainly what Ludwig Wittgenstein is working on with his theory of philosophy and language. All these people are living at around the same time, and they are starting the project of modern art. Modern art in itself, it does not suck. Some pieces might, but in general, it doesn't. Its project is different. Perhaps the greatest criticism against it can be levied that in its pursuit to democratize the art experience, it fell into a greater obscurity where the audience fell off. The audience lost the plot of the project. However, there's also something to be said when you're an artist and you make art for other artists. And a great deal of modern contemporary art focuses specifically on the question, what is art? What are the limits of art? And tries to impress other artists, other people working within the medium. And with these thoughts, I present to you the Eucharist. I hope you really enjoyed this video. It was important to me to explain the thought behind my artwork. It is very important to me to show my education, my background, as well as establish myself in front of your eyes as an independent artist who is capable of working with challenging ideas and ever more sophisticated techniques. And these videos serve this purpose. Hey, we built this audience over the years by working primarily on pop culture stuff, but videos like this is what we live for. This is how we want to expand our audience and show you that we have ideas of our own style and our own techniques. And if you've gotten this far, subscribe, click like, because it's very difficult right now on YouTube to expand your audience and gain subscribers. So please subscribe, click like, that way you don't miss out on any more videos like this. And it signals to us that we're on the right path.